Well, we've been making games for over 30 years.
Yes, over 30. Oh dear, that's showing our age.
So yeah, we started back in the 80s. Originally sort of 81 with a ZX81. Our brother bought it and we just found it under the TV and started playing with it, aged about 12 or 13, I guess.
Yeah.
And really got kind of, well...
That was when computers all came with sort of keyboards and not great games, so you kind of end up like making them yourself, whereas nowadays it's all consoles. Stick a disc in and off you go, and you wouldn't know where to start. Where we had our real success was on this little tiny rubbery keyboarded Spectrum. Was it 48K memory?
There was a cheap 16K version,
yeah,
but nobody had that.
Okay, a whacking 48. And yeah, it was a case of trying to make games on this 8-bit computer.
Is that limitation a good thing?
Yeah, I actually like limitations in some ways. It was a puzzle in how to get the biggest game or adventure working on the very limited memory. And the thing that I used to remember particularly was it couldn't move many graphics around the screen. So you literally had to say, okay, I can move little sprites around the screen and I'm only going to be able to have like 8 or so sprites on the screen. What game could I come up with which like will use that?
You had to design the games around the technical ability of the computer. So you had to look at what it could do and how it would work and how much memory, and then design your game according to it. Whereas as computer technology's got better, you design your game first and the computer has to fit it.
And how did you work together then on this? You've got one computer, there's two of you. Would you
Initially,
have half a keyboard each?
Initially, we would just share one single computer. And when one was actually using the computer, typing in code, the other one would be working out code on paper.
To be perfectly honest, it's actually a really good thing because we used to plan things out really well because the computers were so slow and so basic with just text editors that it's actually really difficult to write the code. And it was all assembly language, so it was really, really codified. But because you couldn't have computer time, because he had it, you'd actually sort of sit down, plan it out, you'd draw scrappy little diagrams, like flow diagrams, if you remember that from your computer studies or computer science, and you'd try and work it all out and you'd actually write it all down. And then when you got the computer time, you would just type in what you'd worked out on paper. We've got all these like hand-drawn notes, but it was amazing that it really gets your thoughts in place. And I actually think we missed it. As soon as we had money to buy 2 computers, we just sat at a computer and it's like, right, text editor on, write a few lines, press compile, no, it doesn't work, it crashes. And actually, you didn't sit down and take stock and plan things.
So would you debug it on the paper as well then?
There were many times where we had really hard bugs.
You sort out the logic, definitely, and the overall structure, but maybe not debug.
Oh, I don't know, there were times where there was really, really nasty bugs and you'd literally just print it out and you'd get a pen and you'd be following it round and round and trying to work out why. Because the computers in those days, we coded things like the Spectrum on a TV with an RF aerial. Okay, now I was wearing glasses for years and years and it was because of things like that.
And the writing was so blurred.
If you actually go back and look at the display and think that we were sitting for sort of lots of hours.
15, 16, 17 hours a day looking at those things.
Yeah, when we weren't working the planning, we were in front of the TV, not monitor, TV. I mean, the signal's just terrible, and it's amazing that we could even read the text. But you only had 32 characters across, because they were big chunky text, because the resolution of graphics was 320 by 240. It's a bit different from your 4K monitors now.
So initially started with a family TV, so the ZX81, the Dragon 32, they were family TV, but then the next computer we bought was an Amstrad. We didn't bring the monitor today, but it came with its own monitor. That is the actual computer that we used.
Philip doesn't chuck anything away. Wait, you'll find this from our YouTube channel. We talk a lot about his loft.
So during the 80s and early 90s, it was just the 2 of us making games. We then set up a company. It was initially called Interactive Studios.
That was because the consoles came along and we
realised... You needed to be a team.
You
needed sort of 4 or 5
We needed proper
people.
artists then.
Yeah, exactly. The resolution of graphics had gone up. So we decided to set up a company, Interactive Studios initially. That was then renamed in '99 to Blitz Game Studios. That company grew off doing lots of contracts with big publishers like your Electronic Arts and THQ and Disney, Sony, Microsoft, all the big publishers.
Made lots of games.
And that company grew to over 235 people, and that went on through until 2013, when unfortunately times changing, digital downloads, free-to-play models and everything all changed. Unfortunately, Blitz stopped trading. So we've set up another company, and that's called Radiant Worlds, and we're developing a game. It's a massively multiplayer online game called Sky Saga.
I just remember what you were saying about consoles, and people didn't know where to start perhaps with a console. With things like the Raspberry Pi and Scratch, do you think that's any chance of changing all of that?
They're great things to learn on, and I think every student make have a play with these things.
Andrew decided to learn Scratch and write a full game in an evening because his son told him he couldn't make a decent game in Scratch.
Well, my son had been asked to write. He was about, I don't know, 11 or 12 or something at school, and they'd come home and their homework was write a little game on Scratch, and it was supposed to write Pong or something, and he was busy doing it, and he was doing okay-ish, but he made some comment about, like, well, you could never write a proper game, and I was looking at it and going, actually, I think you could. And I was trying to think of the things that you couldn't do, because these things were pretty flipping basic, right? They didn't do much, but we wrote some big games on them. So I looked at the Scratch and the Raspberry Pi itself. The Raspberry Pi is incredibly powerful. And it was just a case of seeing what and how it would work, and I was looking at it and thinking, well, it wouldn't do 3D graphics, clearly, but you could do most
2D.
Yeah, you could do anything 2D in any of the 8-bit games, and I sort of said any 8-bit game, and he was like, what, like Pac-Man? And he was like, yeah, you could write Pac-Man easily. And after he went to bed, I decided to write Pac-Man on Scratch. So
by breakfast time, it was ready.
Yeah, it's got, I think it's something like 400,000 views to date. It's had a few years, possibly inspired. Well, no, actually, just completely copied.
The competition is vast. I mean, anybody in the world can basically write a game, and it's very easy. But on the other hand, there is a massive, massive audience and lots of really good tools and lots of really good information about how to write a game. So it's a different equation, but the opportunity is still there. Just ask people like Notch. But what you must do is actually do something original and creative if you want it to get noticed. So you will be very easily able to make a game. And if you're interested in games, you absolutely should just get on and make it. Don't talk about when I make a game and I want to make a game. Just get on and make a game. The question is then getting it promoted and seen by lots of people, and that's actually tough these days because there are so many games out there on all the digital stores.
I actually see a bigger danger. When we got into programming these things, it was partly because there were only 2 TV channels, rubbish music on audio cassettes, although we could listen to it. But
we never had records.
We didn't really read books as such, and I don't know, we were really, really bored. And so tinkering on a computer was what we like to do. Kids can't get bored now, they just physically can't. Pretty much every kid I know has a computer, a smartphone, a console.
Access to Netflix,
YouTube,
Spotify.
Which is brilliant, but if you just spend your time being entertained and you're just a consumer, somebody's got to sit down and go, I want to be brilliant at music, I want to be brilliant at art, or whatever, and spend hours and hours that it takes to learn. So we just dedicated our time to do this stuff, partly through boredom. And that is not really an option anymore. Kids don't get bored. So I actually think that's a sort of major headache and hurdle.
Major hurdle, yeah, absolutely. And you know the one prop we don't have? That's a copy of the book. If somebody can hand us a copy of the book. We are expecting more guests than this. This does sound terribly like an advert, but I have to point out that we don't actually take any money from this. In fact, the contribution that the publisher, Chris Wilkins, would have given to us is actually being donated to Special Effects.
Which do all the work with disabled kids who want to play video games.
Adaptive stuff.
Yeah,
correct.
And they do some brilliant stuff. I mean, the things that I did with eye tracking, there was some games that eye tracking, it even felt like Stephen Hawking could play video games because they've got it so that you can just sort of like control the computer with your eyes, which is very cool. But they've built it into games. Like, yes, you can probably build it into text messaging as well, because that would be useful. But no, I was playing a car racing game with my eyes, which is very cool.
I like that.
So they do some really good work. So we've given our money to them.
Just really nice to sort of be able to sort of record so much stuff in the book that just lives in my loft. I mean, this is just one example. Dream World Pogie on the NES. So yeah, it's just a box file in my loft.
The rediscovered game,
and if we
unreleased.
just go through, there's just Well, that's the original sort of
sketchy diagrams.
sketchy diagram. Some letters back and forwards.
Source code.
This is the source code that we had to recompile from. At one point, we were going to be calling it Blitz.
Which is kind of funny that we came back to that name, really. Called our company Blitz in the end.
And then just kind of working out some sort of notes of how we lay out characters and memory.
What would have been the process then? Did you do a box file like this for every idea or for many ideas?
Basically, it was all the discs and paperwork that were across the desk. Halfway through, you'd like, where do I clear this to? Get another box file, clear it into the box file, and then as the game sort of finishes, you just like clear the desk and just clear it all into the box file, whatever's still on the table that didn't go in the bin.
And what happened to this game then? That's what I suppose what.
So unfortunately,
it's in the book. It's in the book.
That sounds like a plug, but the story is a bit longer and a bit more complicated. But it was developed for the NES. Codemasters were running into various issues with Nintendo and publishing games on the NES, and unfortunately, this one was decided not to be released by them, which was a great shame.
But it's a little bit of a longer story than that.
It is.
But the story's in here.
I'm sure it is.
Quite staggering. We had 46 games and half of them were #1 bestsellers. I mean, just loads of statistics like that. The book has got so much content in, it's going to be quite difficult for people in the future to interview us and say, can you tell me something new that isn't in the book?